Meredith Bergmann, you are considered part of the class of '76 of Wesleyan University. You came in with us in 1972, but you left for more appropriate pastures to get your education, as I understand it. You can fill me in on the rest of that. This is part of a series of videos that started on our 45th reunion, and there are so many interesting people in our class, including some renowned sculptors like yourself. You being the one that I know.
There are others. Ellen Driscoll was in our class. I think she was, unless she was a year ahead. And I shared many art classes with her, and she's had quite a career. Interesting. Okay.
What brought you to Wesleyan? What?
Oh boy.
What made you choose Wesleyan?
I like the architecture. No, that's a little piece of it. I was always going to study art, and my parents, who had graduated from Amherst and Wellesley in their day, insisted that I needed to get a liberal arts education, but failed to explain to me what that was or what it was for. They were very bright people, but not ambitious and not intellectual. Very smart, very caring, very involved in the community and in the town and in land use planning and civil rights and League of Women Voters and many other things, but not in art. And they really didn't know what to do with me. So they said, you got to go to college. And I applied to a number of colleges, but Wesleyan really seemed the most interesting and challenging one that I had applied to. And I did get in. My name then was Meredith Gang. And yes. I did actually sign my most recent monument, Meredith Gang Bergmann, finally. For a while, I was just using my first name. It was kind of an affectation. Anyway, so I went to Wesleyan because it seemed to offer so much, and that excited me.
As it did.
There was so much I didn't know, and because it was the 70s, our high school had relaxed its requirements. And I never took a course in physics or chemistry. There were a number of other things I didn't study, like Latin, that I wish I had. And when I got to Wesleyan, I didn't know what to do with myself. And my advisor was not much help, although he, I think, was an architect who was teaching drawing. John Martin, maybe was his name. I don't remember. I've banished him from memory because he didn't explain that you don't have to take calculus to become an architect. So I dropped out of calculus after a few really horrific months. 9:30 in the morning, calculus. It was rough.
Yeah, they had classes like that early in the morning.
Yeah, and I took German, which I thought would be a good language to know, for family reasons and art historical reasons. And my professor complained to me that I yawned all the time. Of course, that was at 9 a.m., so it was hard. But the art classes were marvelous, and the art history classes were marvelous. And that's really where I felt at home.
Your parents kind of thought that you should have a Wesleyan education, which from the way you described them, they would have been perfect Wesleyan students as well as Amherst and Wellesley.
They might have, yes.
So,
yeah.
You're a New Yorker?
No, I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey.
Montclair, New Jersey.
18 miles west, the suburbs. Very nice place, especially when you're a little kid to grow up. Lots of parks.
I know from Montclair.
Walk to school.
Jimmy Haddon was from Montclair, I think. No, he was from Passaic. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Haddon was one of them, and Charles James was another one of them. And they were from Union and Passaic. Okay, so you got to Wesleyan, and you spent a couple years with us, and then you took off. Where'd you go? What'd you do?
Well, my most encouraging professor was David Shore, who taught printmaking and typography. And I thought I might want to be an illustrator or a graphic designer. And I went off to Parsons School of Design in Manhattan for a sort of junior year abroad in New York.
Okay.
And there I was with kids who were coming from high school, who never intended to go to college, who didn't really read very much, who were not that interested in our history. And I was really bored, and I didn't want to be the kind of graphic designer who is very competitive and sits at a desk and does record album covers, which was the sort of the height of the profession in 1975.
Yeah.
So I applied to a whole bunch of art schools for the next year. But while I was at Parsons, I could take classes at the New School, and that was fascinating because I got
The
involved
New School.
Oh yeah. I had one lecture with a psychology professor in the room where the communist murals are, and they had them all curtained.
Uh-huh.
Just crazy old stuff, vestigial stuff of the New School. But there was a course in New York avant-garde theater, and they took us around to Robert Wilson and oh boy, the Performing Garage and Richard Foreman's ontological hysterical theater. And I ended up working on a Robert Wilson piece because he opened the workshop to people, and getting to know a whole bunch of the kind of tail end of the New York School of painters and sculptors and artists and theater people. And that was really wonderful. And
What an amazing education.
I worked for Red Grooms on Ruckus, Manhattan, which was a huge lobby full of wacky sculpture interpreting all the great landmarks of Manhattan in different scales and sizes. And I worked with a whole bunch of art students painting little dots and critters and things.
Well, one of the things that I like about your stuff is the humor that comes through in it. You've got some really crazy sort of stuff that I'm not a mouse,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a little play on words like that. It's really fun. And there was another one. The Roman tombs looking like TV sets, or TV sets looking like Roman tombs, actually.
That actually happened to us. We were in Rome. We were trying to go to museums, and the Museo delle Terme, the old bathhouse, was closed. The Roman baths, and they had sculptures out on the lawn, the gravel outside the museum, lined up in rows. And those tombs looked like a television sales room from, back when TVs were boxes, each with a head in it looking out at you, about to say something important.
Talking heads.
Yeah.
What are you in the middle of right now?
We bought an old house in May. We moved in May. The oldest part is 1817, and the new part is 2010, and we didn't have heat in half of it until this afternoon. So I'm actually sitting here without 3 sweaters on, wondering why it's so warm and sultry in here. And then I remember the heat works.
You have heat now, huh?
That's nice. Yes.
What are you working on right now? I mean, what's?
I'm in the middle of a few things. They're all commissions. And part of why we bought this house was that we have a barn, which we're converting to my studio, but probably won't be ready till the spring. But that should fit in, because a commission, you start at a small scale. So I'm working at a small scale in our living room on a design for a kind of gateway or screen of a women's memorial for Lexington, Massachusetts, with over 20 historical women kind of flattened in a bas relief on both sides of the gate. So when you walk through, you're greeted by 2 large figures, then a whole bunch of other ones going up. And then when you come back, they're different women on the other side. And that will go right in the center of town. And I'm excited about that because it's a design that I had been kind of thinking about something like that without really consciously thinking about it. And this seemed like the perfect opportunity, even though it isn't what they asked for. They asked for 3 statues and an empty pedestal where you could stand. And I had done 3 statues for Central Park, and I had done 3 statues for Boston. And I know that 3 statues can't represent 1,000 women or 1,000,000 women or even 100 women. They just can't. And the more you can, the more specific personalities you can represent, the more you can kind of rope in everybody. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And then I'm working on something I thought I might never do, because they're kind of a cliche, which is the man on a bench sculpture, except in this case, it's a woman on a bench with room for you to sit, a bronze bench, and she's a little larger than life. But it's Frances Perkins, who was Labor Secretary for 12 years, who's such an amazing figure. And people don't know about her, and they don't realize, well, it's like with women's rights. They don't realize how recently they were won, how fragile they are. So they don't realize we owe Frances Perkins Social Security, unemployment insurance, practically ending child labor, the work week being defined. And she asked for universal health coverage.
Yes, she was the mastermind
and she had a list
behind
presented to
FDR's social programs.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Social Security.
Yeah.
So I'm doing a statue of her with her list, and you can sit down with her and bemoan the lack of health insurance. And then another African-American community organizer woman for the other site in Ithaca, New York. And then I have two things that are kind of on the horizon. One, a statue of an 18th century poet, and one I want to compete for, a statue of a 17th century author, both women. So a lot of women, but that's great.
Your 8-foot tall statue of the famous opera singer Marian Anderson is amazing, and I love the picture. This is going to go up and in a caption on our video of you standing next to it.
I'm working on it. Yeah.
While you're working on it, and you're this little person standing next to this giant.
That's always fun, because you start small and then an interim size and then the full height. I knew about her from childhood and just was amazed at how much of the civil rights struggle I learned about by reading about her, and her courage and her incredible gift, the voice that is heard once in a century, Toscanini said, and how she was able to be a star in Europe and then had to come home with her white Scandinavian accompanist and tour America and sit on a bench outside the railroad station, and her accompanist would bring her sandwich while German prisoners of war who were white could eat in the cafeteria. I just,
Yes.
And the story, I think I learned about her because we had an edition of the World Book when I was little, an encyclopedia. And of course I looked up my birthday, and the night before I was born, she broke the color barrier at the Metropolitan Opera. So of course I had to ask, what is a color barrier?
Yeah, but your parents were were civil rights activists in certain,
not in a big way. They were appreciators. They were deeply emotionally involved. They worked within the town for civil rights. They didn't go on marches. They didn't travel. They thought that the Jewish heritage, which in our family was not at all religious, was really study and education and bringing everybody else along, trying to melt into the American dream and making that open to everybody, and decency and fairness and equality. But, these were very general kinds of values and very pervasive.
So lots of your work, your sculpture, has to do with civil rights, women's rights, social justice. When artists do that, it just means a whole lot to me, because a lot of artists, they'll do what they love. I do what I love. When I create music, or when I write poetry, I'm doing what I love. But I always have this corner of my mind where it's like, I live in this world that people need to speak the truth about what's happening to people.
Yeah.
People we love, people we don't know, but we should love anyway. Well, down through the ages, art has been the thing that has been able to make people aware of what's been going on. because a lot of times history is changed so that you don't know what really happened.
Yeah.
But if art sticks around and honors people, then
Yes.
that's a wonderful thing.
I think honoring people is the important thing, because I feel like great people belong to all people and can inspire all people. So someone who fights for freedom or justice within a particular racial group or ethnic group can inspire anybody.
Mhm.
And the women's rights movement can inspire men, etc. So I'm trying to make these things as universal as possible.
You have a sculpture where you have President Roosevelt and a young girl reaching
Yeah,
towards each other. Where is that now? Where is
that's
that?
on Roosevelt Island.
It's on Roosevelt Island. Huh?
Yeah, that was a long project started by a grassroots group in response to the proposed Four Freedoms Park, which was then built very quickly, relatively. And my project took about 10 years, 11 years to get unveiled because it was so grassroots.
Hmm.
That Four Freedoms Park is this gorgeous $50 million thing designed by Louis Kahn before he died in the 1970s.
Okay.
And there's a gigantic head of Roosevelt, just, portrait head by an artist who worked from life, Joe Davidson. FDR sat for him. And this group was saying, okay, but where's Roosevelt below the neck? Where they were disabled people who lived on Roosevelt Island, who were in the hospitals for the chronically disabled and the chronically ill. And they wanted something that recognized that he was stricken with polio at age 39 and then eventually became governor and then became president and then helped us win World War II, etc. So they wanted
a
that.
Disabled person.
Yeah, exactly. And they wanted him with a disabled
country.
child, by which they were thinking something very sentimental. So I wanted to show something where you could interact with it. You can go in and shake his hand, even if you're in a wheelchair, you can wheel right up and people climb on them. And I really wanted that, to experience the bodies and see what the disease did and, appreciate the courage.
Well, that having, and I when we talked before, I said I spent most of my life, professional life, working in the Social Security disability program. And I ended up being the administrator for the state of Michigan for all the claims that were coming through. And then I ended up working for Social Security to end my career during the Obama administration. And I think they should have on their campus in West Baltimore something by you. So maybe we'll work on that. I mean, one of your earlier sculptures was County Cullen, a poet, African-American poet. These sculptures, they're very expressive. You capture people very, very well. You're amazing.
Oh, thank you. I'll fill in the history. I went to Cooper Union. I discovered sculpture there in the bronze foundry. I made little bronze surreal kind of objects very easily. I didn't have to learn technique much. I didn't need patience. And then after I graduated, suddenly I had a BFA. I traveled, I went to Italy, and I ended up remaining in Italy and studying stone carving and more bronze casting and learning patience and learning technical things about sculpture, and then came back and started working. And a lot of what I did was opportunistic. If there was a commission announced, this is before the internet, so in a magazine or by direct mail, that had an interesting theme, I would apply for it because I was interested in history and definitely interested in literature. And the County Cullen thing was an exhibit in Woodlawn Cemetery of biography memorials. And there was a little stipend for each artist, and you were supposed to exhibit your sculpture for a year. So I knew it had to be a durable material. And you were supposed to pick someone who was buried in the cemetery to memorialize. And I was fascinated by Cullen and his poetry and the Harlem Renaissance and the deep engagement in formal poetry and his love of John Keats. And all of that was just so interesting to me. because at the same time, modernism was in its heyday and continues. I just kind of fell for his story. And after that exhibition, looked around for a place for the sculpture and ended up donating it to the New York Public Library, which has a County Cullen branch. And when that branch was renovated, they put it down in the middle of their lobby, which made me very happy. And they have a big quotation from another of his poems, not one of the ones on the pedestal, up on the mezzanine. So it really celebrates the Harlem Renaissance.
Place. Yeah.
But he's buried in with a little stone next to his second wife's second husband. And it's just a little flat stone in the grass that says something like teacher, author, scholar, poet. I mean, it doesn't really proclaim the beauty of his poetry, the power of it.
A lot of things that happened in the Harlem Renaissance were not even paid attention to till many years later. You know, who were your influencers? Who are the people? Any at Wesleyan? Other places? Tell me about them.
Well, I love the art history classes at Wesleyan. There was a huge survey course with Sam Green, where I learned to write in the dark, take notes. David Shore and his deep love of graphic imagery and the history of it, going back to a time when, almost like the internet, people who were very, very, very poor could buy a print and for the first time have an image in their home of any kind of image. There was nothing. And then with the invention of the woodblock and printmaking, these things could be dispersed. And that it's just such an amazing thing to know that there was a point at which that began. So the Davison Art Center, I remember it opening, and the print vault where you could look at Rembrandt etchings and see how he made decisions from state to state. Wonderful, wonderful. And I had really great courses with John Paoletti. And in fact, I used to go to the Met Museum to hear him lecture up through the 90s, where he gave wonderful lectures. He is a wonderful art historian of the Italian Renaissance. So which I had kind of fallen for. And then when I lived in Italy, absolutely. Well, I lived in Florence briefly, and then I moved out to near Carrara in Pietrasanta, which in those days was not a glamorous jet set place, but a small town where when you got off the train, when the train stopped, you'd hear ka-ching, ka-ching, ching, 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 which was people hammering on marble. There were so many marble yards. It was great. I did not find a mentor in sculpture. So I had to kind of look around and study everybody and kind of think it through for myself.
So this
because
is
nobody has my twisted sense of humor. Nobody's quite, wants to do something. I once made a marble carving, which I later sold to Val Kilmer, of all things. It was a marble carving of a head. But there was something kind of cartoony about it. And I remember another student saying, I can't believe you'd spend so much time on a joke. And I thought, well, what else,
Yeah, humor is one of the wonderful things that we have in humanity that has to be honored. And that's why I say, when I look at some of your things, I have the list. I have a list of things here, like the urn with the crumpled paper hand.
Yet it's also very tragic. It's a whole bunch of real poets modeled.
Yeah, real poets crumpling up, and I know that
through those drafts and thrown that paper away.
Yeah.
No, and now I do very serious commissions, but I'm always trying to inject some kind of wit into them.
So I have something for you. Hopefully it's not insulting, but I said that would be a perfect waste-paper basket to commercialize. And
yes,
you could sell millions of those things.
Maybe.
Not out of bronze or the whatever material you had that, but the press, some. No, we don't want to
be my agent, and
we don't want to send your work to China, no. And what is it? Oh, the forbidden fruit. That was like, and most people just walk right by stuff like that and not pay attention. But someone who inspects it closely would go, oh my, so
that's the idea.
So love your humor and stuff. And
Thank
but
you.
also how you capture people so well, like you captured Marian Anderson. That's just a powerful, powerful sculpture. And you know, FDR and you have one on here, Nike as a dead albatross, which
Yeah.
which is a very topical political statement. And your Daphne reconsidering,
Hmm.
another one where you kind of have to know the story. But
Yes. And I also had it in an exhibition in a building in Manhattan, a municipal building, for several months, and I put all kinds of texts with it. A wonderful passage from Isadora Duncan's autobiography where she talks about going to pose for Rodin and how thrilled she was, and then how he left off groping the clay and started to grope her, and she ran away. And she fled like Daphne, but later regretted it. She wished she had stayed. So I was dealing with sort of Me Too, but also sexuality. And I had some pieces that preceded that piece in the show. So it kind of told the myth in a larger context.
your September 11th sculpture, it's disturbing
Yeah.
because we kind of know what it means, but you know, but not that personal.
Right. It just popped into my head. I was thinking, because I was living in New York, the smoke was in our apartment. Going out into the city afterwards was amazing. I never want to live through a war because it was like that. There were no elderly people on the street, nobody fragile, just young, healthy people. And we all had to bunch at the corner. And then a soldier would kind of wave stop the police, the phalanxes of police cars and hustle everybody across and then stop you again. And like living under martial law, it basically was. It was
Yeah.
terrifying. But I started that piece right after the attacks, and I was just trying to find a way to convey the feeling that the city would survive, could absorb this, but it was a terrible awakening, really. And it seems to have succeeded. I did that larger version for the cathedral, which made me very happy because we've probably visited 60 cathedrals in various countries and the United States and looked at art there over 40 years. And I'm not conventionally religious, but I do love art history, and the history of art is art commissioned by the church or the state.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever the church, the
Yep,
religion of the
so.
time. So it's spiritual and it's functional, and it affirms the laws and values and rules of a society in a way, historically. And I wanted to make a piece that could remind people of that and yet break a lot of the rules. So it's a naked woman in a cathedral. It's someone who's quite surrealistically supporting the planes in her hands. And that's not a realistic thing. And they're small. And yet she's kind of suffering and yet surviving. I wanted it to be very ambiguous. And it seems to be. And the cathedral has books you can write in next to it, and they've been through dozens and dozens full of them. They preserve them, where people go straight to some kind of deep comment about the world and life, or they say I was there.
So that's why I struggled to describe it, because it is ambiguous, and that's good, and it's disturbingly ambiguous. So it brings out, it's like a Rorschach.
Well, there's a wonderful, wonderful sculpture in Washington, I think it's in Rock Creek Park, by Augustus St. Gaudens, that just is called Grief. And it's a woman, a deeply hooded, shadowed figure, swathed in this heavy cloth, of a young woman that is, again, very ambiguous. And it's a grave memorial to I think it's Henry Adams' wife who committed suicide, Clover Adams.
Hmm.
And it's her monument, but it has taken on a much larger meaning. So that was my inspiration.
You did a relief of Richard Wilbur
Yes.
for Wesleyan, or
No, for myself.
okay.
I admired his work. I started
No, I had to
studying.
bring that up because he's a Wesleyan prof, you know. So.
Yes, I remember seeing him at Wesleyan. I didn't study poetry at Wesleyan. I was too intimidated by the
I took two. I
people in our class.
took Japanese literature, so I learned to write haiku. But anyway, I interrupted.
I took a short story writing class and discovered I couldn't invent plots, but I didn't realize I should be writing poetry. Anyway, I remember Richard Wilbur as this dashing man in his 40s, kind of striding into the theater at the art center. But I didn't study with him. And then later I met him through poetry conferences and got to know his work and got to know him. And I asked him if he would pose for a portrait, and I was trying to do a bust, a head. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful to visit him because his father had painted him as a very young man. His father painted and was an artist. And he said, I'm used to sitting for people. And I ended up using one of the many, many photos that my husband and I took that day, and of him at his window, and creating a bas-relief based on that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You're a poet. I'm
a sculptor who writes poetry.
Which makes you a poet.
Okay.
And a sculptor. So two art forms. I like to say that I'm someone who tries to write poetry and also tries to create music, but I'm successful with neither one of them. So I decided to be a bureaucrat. Well, anyway, that's my joke.
Sorry.
When
so you became a bureaucrat.
Yeah, he became a bureaucrat because as they say, poetry never makes you any money. You can never make a living off of poetry. You always have to have something else. But I'm an amateur poet, which means I love poetry. I love to read people's poetry, and I love to try to write poetry, and sometimes I pull it off. And you're published. I've got a few published, and you write about personal things, your child, your family. One of the edition that I know that you have on your website is called Special Education, and they're poems about. Yes, there it is, a special education. Yep. And they're poems about raising your special needs child. Yeah. And some other things. You sent me a copy of it, and it ended up in Michigan, sitting on my desk. Okay. And hopefully it hasn't been shuffled into someplace in our absence by my stepson and put into a pile somewhere that I can't find. So I will get to it. Right. Because I opened it up and read the first poem, and I said, this is nice. And I said, put it down, and I said, I'm going to take this to Montreal with us so I can absorb it better. And then, yeah. So
it happens.
So it will be a Christmas present. It'll be a Christmas present from you to me, because when we go back on the 23rd of December, I will look for it and read it. Okay. I was going to ask you if you'd like to read one.
Sure. Well, I have a poem in the Powder River Poets Anthology. This is a group in New England that I've been a member of for a long time. Wonderful group of very warm, very critical poets. And it's great to meet with them. And I'm going to read a poem about, well, it's not really about sculpture. It's based on a New England poet from the, I think the 17th century, Edward Taylor.
Okay.
a minister who wrote poems, and he wrote one called Huswifery, where he talks about his spiritual progress towards heaven in terms of weaving the robes, but spinning the thread and creating the cloth and sewing the robe and etc. So it's about a creative process, and the steps are all spelled out.
Oh, okay.
And I love bronze sculpture, and that process is very elaborate, very laborious, and it involves many transformations from positive to negative. You sculpt a face, and then you make a mold, and then you basically ruin the original clay, but you have the mold. And then in that mold, you pour hot wax. And then the wax becomes the new face that you work on. And then that is invested in fireproof plaster or ceramic, out of which the wax is melted, leaving a void that is the shape of the face. And then into that mold, hot molten metal is poured. When that has cooled, the mold is broken away, and you have this rough version of the face, which you then go in and chase. You file it and cut away extra metal and polish it, and then you have the bronze sculpture. So it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Amazing. You did that in like 90 seconds.
Yeah, I've done it a lot. So this is called Lost Wax.
Okay.
Lost Wax after Edward Taylor's Huswifery. And it follows the form of his poem exactly.
Okay.
Make me a portrait of a self more fine, to cast me from myself to final form. Rain down and moisten all the dust that's mine, and make me clay that you may knead and warm. Then pack me round an armature of bone, until you find the shape that is my own. Then make the mold to copy me in wax. I am my shape, my clay you may forget, no matter if it dries and falls and cracks. My just impression will survive me yet. Then burn me out, so deep inside your oven, my wax is lost, to let my void be proven. This fireproof mold of loving memory made, may drink the boiling alloy of your grace, of which I then consist. Your heat then fade, and let me harden. Break me out and chase away my imperfections. Make me well, that I now hollow ring. Make me your bell.
That, and that reminds me of a poem that I wrote, recently, but not too recently. It's unpublished.
Well, I would love to hear it.
But there is a psychologist, his name is Robert Keegan,
Mm-hmm.
and he talks about the maturation process of people, and how a lot of times we think that you reach maturity when you're 18 to 25 years old. But just like us, we mature and we have lines and we have character, and things like that occurs, and it's maturity. And some people fight against it all their lives to the deficit of themselves and everybody around them. And then other people learn to embrace it and become, the person that you need to become.
Mm-hmm.
See if I can find it.
Oh, great.
Oh, well, I wrote one on maturity, but I wrote one on belief, which I think is even better. And it's the same idea that I talked about with Robert Keegan, but it takes a different approach. And it's called Belief. I have not been laid upon by such a crafty thief as one who carries the name Belief. He chastens my creative thought and brings my imagination about to leave it hanging like a leaf on a finely decorated but fruitless tree. Poor me, my mind was formed to fit this trap, but it was also made more than that. Belief assigns a clear dead end, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. He walks at a pace that honors that until I break away to see a lonely path towards maturity.
Mm.
And then the
Very-
maturity poem says, maturity stands on the shoulders of love and hate and fear and tribe and honor and glory and reifications, yes, and deifications and hype and stereotype. It lights a light and takes a breath, feeling all upon all of which stands so deeply, and opens eyes to see a bit further in the distance towards what it stands upon really means. I don't know if I read that right, but. So you reminded me of that because in making the sculpture, you start something out of one material and then you destroy it by getting to the next step.
Yes.
And then you do it again and you do it again. And that's what life is. Or you're doing an allegory of creation of life when you do that, because that's what we do with ourselves.
It's kind of like the college education is just the first stage, and then
yes.
we continue to educate ourselves and form ourselves and struggle with ourselves all life long.
Yes. And that's why it's nice to come back and talk to each other, you know, who we walked on the campus together. We didn't know each other.
No.
We walked on the campus together at that time, and we were influenced by similar people who worked together, faculty who worked together, and friends. Yeah. And then we became these people that went out into the world and took a little bit of that and turned it into who we are right now.
Yes.
And it's been great finding out who you are, working for social justice and historical redress through public art. I like that. That's like a motto to live by when you're an artist.
I keep trying to live up to it.
What are you going to be doing 4.5 years from now when we get together for our reunion?
Oh boy.
Our 50th.
Well, I hope either something really big in Washington, D.C., you know, or internationally, or a whole bunch of very small, wittier sculptures that, like what I began doing long ago, little bronze, surreal creations.
So you're open.
One or the other.
Open
big,
to
go
wonder.
big or make little pieces again. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not very good at self-promotion, but I do appreciate the chance to talk with you and talk about Wesleyan. And I spent some time today trying to remember all the people that I knew that I'm not in touch with, and which of them were most influential and what they gave me. And that was a very, very good experience. So thank you for that. I also thought about the courses I'd taken and the professors and the whole milieu, really, the whole thing. It was interesting to remember it. I was in West College.
Okay.
And I remember sensitivity training evenings with Charlie Krieger. Did you?
I didn't go to any of those, but I
feel like I dreamed them. So maybe I was stoned. I don't know. It was. I was 17 when I went to college. I didn't know anything.
Yeah, I was too. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not that clued in at 17.
No, and then, you know, I'd like to say that there's a lot of things that happened at Wesleyan that I don't remember at all. I just have no.
Oh, good. Yeah, I have that.
You know, formally, I say thank you very much, Meredith.
Thank you, Byron.
For spending time and tolerating me for this period of time. And I look forward to seeing you at the reunion in 2026 and seeing your work